love the music that plays in Donegal. I think it's brilliant, but it's a very long playlist of music that plays in Donegal, and the fact that you start off with the exact same track every single time you go to Donegal and you like appear in Donegal.
Yes. And he's hurting.
I love it.
Definitely hurting.
But I think there's so much other good music on that playlist as well that you could afford to like rotate it out. I feel like you could afford to have, you know, instead of I start my game and the first thing that happens every single time is ba 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 ba, which is awesome.
Yeah.
But you kind of
Damage
like,
done
you
by
know,
50,
after a while
40.
your brain kind of it's too familiar, and it's like you start resenting it after a while. That's actually what happened with me with the music in Valdrakken. I just didn't want to hear it anymore, you know.
Well, but that never, ever, ever happened to the music in Borealis. So, Borealis stays goated. Common Borealis W.
I think there's so much good music in Donegal. Every patch you can afford to have the opening track be different. You know, and just swap out. I think that would really, really be good. Music changing over the course of time also reflects the passage of time. Yes, exactly. That I completely agree. That'd be really good. So sorry, a bit of a sidetrack there from the question, but yeah, that was something I was thinking today. Which means I think literally today was the point where I hit the wall with it. Today was the point where I was like, I would like Donegal to be playing different music at this stage, please. And I remember it got like that in BFA as well, you know, particularly in Borealis, which had that like almost comically loud and bombastic fanfare every single time you logged in. And it's like you could just play some of the other Borealis music when we log in now. That'd be good.
We're done.
Because I just think that would be a very easy change you could make.
Let's be done has been called.
Oh, and buddy, you're here. You're here with the super
well,
chat
good
now.
job, guys. We got two at least.
What do you think about the
ready to hit it hard
Warcraft 2
next week.
remaster that was data mined last night? Oh shit, something we didn't even talk about.
Still needs enchants, sockets, and stuff like that. Hit me up, and I'll work with you on trying to get them.
Doing an alt-heroic run on Saturday again, Liquid? Are you available?
I should be able to, yeah. If not, you know, you guys can still go. It's not hard either way.
No, we have to go with you only. It's like watching Game of Thrones. Like, we can't miss you being there.
Well, I think we had two people wanting to tank it, so
I'll
probably
tank if you want.
Pally.
Yeah, if you want. Otherwise, I'll DPS on my warrior. I don't care.
No, I don't mind going on my
Today because we were too busy talking about other things. Yes, there has been a data mined like art for a Warcraft 2 remastered. Very interesting they haven't called it reforged.
How much later?
I wonder why. I think it's a brilliant idea. People were talking about this even before the data mining. I think there was speculation this would be happening. Because like a remaster of Warcraft 1 and 2 is such an obvious thing to do for the 30th anniversary, which is what we're in right now, right? So I'm completely in favor. I think it's a bit weird if there isn't a
Camera's going nuts.
Both like relatively short games.
Camera's going nuts.
So I think that would be great. The one thing I
Camera's going nuts
is I just want it to be a 2D remaster. I don't want them to put no 3D fucking models in there, okay? That's my one hope for this.
I need all the crests.
Just don't put those 3D models in there. You know, I think that was one of the major. I mean, so Warcraft 3 Reforged was like plagued by some really bad bugs and like game-breaking stuff, and that's a testament to how the team just were not given enough time to make it. I think that's made quite clear.
The ring's going for 755k without the third stat.
Play nice.
Hell yeah.
You know, like they just did not have enough time. Yeah, like the StarCraft.
How much is it going for?
They're 2D games.
755k.
You know? Isometric 2D games with sprites.
Without the third stat.
Make them
without
with sprites. Please don't put 3D models in there just to look.
All right.
I don't think.
Well, so ends the part of the raid where there is both the crosstalk of my raid in Discord and what I'm watching. But I happen to rather like all the yapping, so I hope it's not too off-putting for others.
I think they will. I think it will be Sprite because I think it's probably quite a small-scale project. This, but that's what I'm thinking. But I think another bad thing about Warcraft 3 Reforged was I know that Warcraft 3 is 3D as well, but the graphics were chunkier and more sprite-like than what Reforged gave us.
Yeah, I do have a
Just didn't
catalyst
read
charge.
as well on the screen. You know, just didn't read
So I
well.
could
Yeah, Warcraft 2 is a lot
get a
more relevant to
tertiary,
the current
probably
Warcraft
speed.
universe than Warcraft 1 would be. That's absolutely for certain. Like, you know, Khadgar's in it and stuff like that. And yeah, I'm looking forward to it immensely.
No, I think we got to hang on to it. We got to hold out until we have either 2 charges or a mythic beast. We can't waste it.
And seeing the lore would be really, really good. And the stuff that's
We can't
changed
waste
as
it.
well. And having it in a more user-friendly kind of package, I think that would be terrific. The RTS game, I could take.
Back to Mythic Plus build.
Again, there was loads of stuff wrong with Reforged, which people justifiably didn't like and justifiably.
Oh,
complained
the
about.
broom
State
is still
that
instant
game was
cast.
Unacceptable. However, I do
Because
also
Hallow's
think
End is not
there's
over.
people's hatred of that game.
You know
which
what
was
that
them just realizing they
means.
didn't like
The horseman.
just as a gameplay style, it's kind of old-fashioned now, and you know, I think people realizing that they just didn't like Warcraft 3 just wasn't as enjoyable to them as they thought it would be or as they remembered it, added extra fuel to their hatred of it, right? And of like everything that was objectively wrong with that remaster. So I don't know. We'll see, but I'm really looking forward to it. I really want it to be 2D. I really want it to be sprites. Like, give me that good stuff. It'd be great. Daisy. Oh, are you guys RTS fans who will give it a go, buddy? Yeah, I will definitely play it. Yeah, I played a lot of RTSs back in the day. I'm not interested in playing RTSs at all these days, to be honest. I think the last RTS that I really sunk a lot of time into was Dawn of War, which I think was like, I was playing it in I think 2004. You know, I was busting Dawn of War in 2004, right? Loving that shit. Maybe it was maybe Dawn of War 2. I don't know, but it was a Dawn of War game, right? And that was the last RTS that I spent a lot of time on. Oh no, do you know what? No, the Star Wars RTS set in the prequel universe. What was that one called? I spent a lot of time on that actually. That was the last RTS that I played. That I spent a lot of time on. I can't remember what it was called at all. I'm sure chat will help me out, but it was a Star Wars RTS based in the prequel universe. So there we go. Daisy. Coincidence that we get the Sylvanas transmog right when we find out that the world is a prison. I mean, yes. I would point out that we also get the I know you're saying that tongue-in-cheek, right? But I would point out we also get the Varian transmog in the trading post this month, and the Kirin Tor. Okay, so the trading post this month is so full of stuff. The extra 500 tendies is a joke. It's absolutely ridiculous that like that's all the tendies we've got to spend.
Oh, I forgot to swap in my Mythic Plus trinkets, of course.
The Varian transmog and the Kirin Tor transmog, and I believe there's 4 different color schemes of like the new cloth, like drape shoulders and the helmets with the
there's way too much on the trading post this month.
I mean, you're
it's really
looking at
annoying.
Thousands of tendies that you want to spend on that, not to mention the returning transmog weapon sets and transmog sets as well. So it's disgusting. We need loads more tendies. The new Plunder Storm will give you tendies by playing it as well, but that's not coming till January. This shit's gonna be gone by then. So like obviously the Varian and the Kirin Tor and the Sylvanas thing I think is playing into the whole anniversary element of this month. But yeah, I mean
There's a little bit of FOMO to that as well, though.
Prison Sylvanas is here. I mean, I obviously think Sylvanas will be coming back in midnight, like most other people. I think she'll be making an appearance. So, but yeah, not enough tendies this month.
Hey, I got an invite from Liquid Dank.
Instead. And I need all those Prowler masks, right? I'm gonna actually have to go around collecting tricky treats before
collecting tricky treats.
Hallow's End finishes, which I think is on the 8th. So I've got like a day to do that basically. So that I can buy like the Hallow's End Prowler mask and shoulder drapes, because I'm not going to be able to get all the ones from the Tendy store, and I'm not going to be able to freeze them either. So there's that. Oh, it was Old Republic, that game. Thank you. Yeah, I'm pissed off because I love those new Prowler masks and shoulder drapes. I think they're fantastic. But gotta buy the big. I think what I'll probably do is freeze.
I guess I'm lucky because I don't really like the new Prowler masks personally.
next month.
They feel like they're from a different
Buy as
game.
many of the shoulder drapes that I can, because that is like prime transmogging potential and items there, honestly. Yeah. So well, with the tricky treats, I bought the bits that I needed for the harvester set. But I think I can afford the Prowler mask and the drapes if I go and collect all the tricky treats all over Azeroth. So I've got to give myself
collecting all the tricky treats.
And then I can get them, because I really regret if I have to wait another year for those. Because the Hallow's End one is especially good, I think. Thank you to everyone who donated those super chats for this episode. Sorry it was just me answering them. We will make sure that next week it's me and Evie on them. Absolutely, 1,000,000%. Of course, another very, very sad thing that we haven't talked about, but I've just been reminded by mentioning the end of Hallow's End, is that Eve's Ghastly Charger or other broomstick mounts obviously will not be instant cast after Hallow's End. If you've got a broomstick mount, Eve's Ghastly Charger, it's instant mount. So basically everyone is a druid during Hallow's End if you have one of those mounts. And it's so good, and you get so used to it, especially because they even work in dungeons.
Yep, it's
which
fucked
is
up.
A game changer. If you have a broomstick mount and you're not using it in dungeons, especially Dawnbreaker, my child, you are a fool. You
It's
have
fucked
a day
up.
and a half left still to use it. Honestly, like any dungeon, having instant mount is amazing. Like Arakara, oh dude, instant mounting in that shit is incredible. But on the Dawnbreaker, it is wild. It is so good. It's literally an advantage in the boss on the boat. Like, oh, and I bet in Battlegrounds as well.
Yeah, I gotta hang on to a lot of this stuff so I can
when she
upgrade
starts
it and
casting
unlock
the big
more
spell, you have to
transmog with it.
mount up and get on the boat. You're literally saving 2.5 seconds. It's a game changer, and I'm gonna die to that ability so much when that stops using. A broom skywriding too. Yeah, all mounts, pretty much all flying mounts in the game are skywriding now.
The only one that's not is the Blue Otter, I
Ruby's buggy
believe.
on mount cast sometimes got me killed. You just got to stand still while you're doing it. You can't. So we're not quite druids. You can't be moving and cast it. You have to be standing still. But I've never had a problem with it because I just assumed it wasn't going to work in dungeons, but it does. And the fact that it won't be usable anymore is definitely the worst thing that has happened today, and the reason that I'm sad. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you to everyone who joined us for the live recording. Like I say, thank you to everyone that chipped in with those super chats. But thank you to everyone that's been taking part in the chat and being patient with us in the pre-show, where we get all the sound sorted and everything like that. If I get this up on your podcast listening channels, thank you for everyone who's listening there as well. Thank you to everyone who's watching this VOD on our YouTube channel later on. It's great. We'll be back for the weekly reset this weekend and making space in our schedules for the big I assume 11.1 announcement next week, Wednesday in the evening. Me and Evie are going to be live streaming that on our Twitch channel. So if you want to come by and watch that with us, I dare say there'll be some tuxedos involved. I dare say there'll be some champagne involved. You know, I love a patch reveal, fam. So we'll all be there. Hopefully you can join us for that. But if not, thank you very much for joining us today. Until next time, from me, Taliesin, and Evertel as well, cheerio.
Lovely. Wonderful. Truly the loveliest WoW podcast. Now a video from
Jack has a
Maximum
Mythic Plus manifesto. You know what Jack did? Jack actually had a
Automatic
crazy
Jack.
fucking good video and I had never seen it, and it was during
He's
the
talking
race,
about automatic
I guess.
jack.
And he got a lot of positive feedback on it, I think. But I just want to shout out a video I watched of him. Yeah, see, I did. I've seen like the first like minute of this, I guess. But no, where was this, dude? How world first Mythic Kaiveza was healed.
There's more stamina.
I think a lot of people don't really understand healing at a high level in this game. Like, why would you not just bring healers that do the most HPS? A lot of it, and especially this fight, was like playing very specific specs for single target healing and letting very specific rule. Like Paladin is better than Shaman on this fight, but it's like Evoker is just better at what Paladin is doing, and Shaman does something different that we needed, and like that's why we made that swap. And a lot of people don't understand that. And he really broke it down well in this video. I watched almost all of it. And you can see in the comments, they're like, dude, awesome analysis, amazing video. And I think the healer community, or the amount of people that watched this, which it got a pretty good amount of views, was like really helpful to know like how healing is done at this level and why, which was really good. I'd listen to healers about Mythic Plus if two of them could ever agree on anything about it. I think it's like the whole Mythic Plus community, honestly. Like, I don't even think it's their fault, but like
I didn't pull the big mob,
they've
just
had
a
all
little
these
one.
like changes that they haven't liked over the last few years, and most of it, now that we know, like Blizzard didn't even like high Mythic Plus players. Like Blizzard never thought about them one time. But like I feel like they deep dived every change that was made, thinking it was aimed at them. And I think that just drove them crazy. And now, like, I don't think it's possible for the Mythic Plus community to have, like, a normal response to anything getting released. They just have to, like, go through the motions of, like, absolutely melting down, and then they, like, think about it a little more. And then, I mean, that's probably, like, most WoW people, but, like, the Mythic Plus community is so... They just have, like, little brother syndrome, you know? They feel like they're disregarded in place of raid, and they have to like fight for everything they have, so they're like super loud, and like every change is so important. Like another thing is like they ask for Kiss Curse affix, not everyone, but like people are like, let's do Kiss Curse affixes, and now they come out and people are like, oh well, we wanted no affixes, and well wait, when the affixes are totally gone, and it's just like no one actually, there's just so much opinions coming from different directions. Like Blizzard just has to like cook on the mode themselves and make it better. We talk about that a little bit on the potty. You know what? Let's watch this Jack video.
Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. Going into the war,
Jack looking slim, dude. Jack looking like a skinny legend.
One of them. I think they really have missed the mark in terms of what they're actually kind of doing to the player base in the process.
Wait, with the change? Or I think he means like when they introduced Challenger's Peril in the first place. I'm with him there. The change was... I've heard a lot of weird takes about the change. So, like, it should have been this. They're basically... The most reasonable arguments are, like, they could have done this and it would have been better. And they're, like, suggesting a different change. But I don't think anyone's suggesting that, like, them doing this change was actively bad. Like, I think Dorky tried to get around to saying some shit like that on the podcast. And both Dratnos and I... Or maybe it was the bonus episode. But Dratnos and I were both like, what? It was some weird shit. I don't know. You could tell that like he had talked about it with his chat a lot, I think, and they like convinced themselves that this was actually bad, which this is just objectively better for like anyone doing Mythic Plus than what it was previously. Not to say that they couldn't like completely remove Challenger's Peril or change it slightly differently. This is definitely a W, right? Just, a lot of people are timing keys more often. The retroactive thing was also super interesting. I don't know if you guys noticed it when they changed this, but like you would have logged in with more score because any key that you would have timed with 90 more seconds like automatically got counted as timed, like retroactively. But at the same time, if you didn't time a 10 previously, but then you did retroactively, you actually didn't get the portal, you had to like go back in and do it. It's kind of weird.
In Dragonflight, there were a lot of times, especially...
What is it? It'd be better if they were free deaths instead of the timer change, but I imagine there are programming challenges there. Yeah, so I think you're right. Like, I imagine that's just a harder change to implement. Like, just increasing the timer is probably piss, right? Like, that's just super easy to handle. Relatively. That just sounds that way. I don't really know how hard that would be. Like, specifically the first deaths don't matter, or like one death per player doesn't count against the timer. But like, how would that even be better? Like Dorky was saying, like, oh yeah, well yeah, it spots you free deaths unless no one dies, but if no one dies, then like the key timers are easy, so you naturally get pushed to a higher level that's harder. And it's like, that's a high key only problem. Like, the only time that argument would ever be relevant is if the reason you're not timing keys is you're having 0 deaths and you couldn't make it, which doesn't affect anyone on a 10 literally ever, right? Like, you're not timing an 8 or a 10 because of deaths, not because everyone lived all the way through and you were just slow. Like, that's just not real. It's like or maybe it's very uncommon. Like at a high, like it's mostly high keys where that's the thing, but I mean it's like an infinitely scaling system, like putting you into the next key level. There's a whole other conversation, and we did end up having this where it's like, yeah, it still just feels bad. Like the level where you feel like everything one-shots you and the level that's hard to do damage to time it doesn't add up like it did before Dragonflight. Like that's an entirely different conversation, but like specifically the way that they changed this thing, I don't think it doesn't matter really how they do it.
Season 3 and Season 4, running with some of the Zodiac comps that you had there, you could really like steamroll keys up into pretty high levels without really respecting a lot of the dungeon mechanic. And so, as they even write right here, they want Challengers Apparel to emphasize precise play and greater risk on player decisions as they progress through higher keystone levels. So they say, hey, we want to give you some breathing room, you know, not make it as punishing, but we still want this initial goal of precise play come into effect. Now the issue is that
I'll let him finish.
In Dragonflight, you didn't have this penalty, and you could rack up like 20-something deaths in certain dungeons and still time it, which felt really weird for a timed event.
True.
Especially with runbacks involved as well. A lot of people really enjoyed being able to kind of like steamroll keys up until they got into a high level. The problem was that you would have a really huge mix of players where you didn't really understand this person with this IO or this person with the same IO actually knew the dungeon mechanics. And so what they've in the War Within is like big wall, especially at 12, where the health, the damage are all really high.
I don't even know if the wall, like most people don't even encounter the wall. Like if you're even, he's referring to the wall as a 12 of like the big jump in difficulty. The thing is like you
Most people don't even
know
get
what
there.
kind of player you are, and you know what you're.
I'm already in like the top 5%, top 2% of players by even doing 10s. Like most players do not make it up that high. Most people, even a lot of heroic raiders, are not making that. They're not trying to.
Your goals are if you ever attempt a 12 for any reason whatsoever, right? Like attempting a 12 is such a deliberate, like I'm pushing for high key score, maybe for title at the end of the season, or like I'm trying to play the game a little bit. Like no person who does Mythic Plus just for the portals or just for their weekly keys, and it's not like Mythic Plus is their main thing, and this is true statistically too. You can see this has been the case for years, especially since they've added the portals.
In the numbers.
Like almost all 97-98% of people never even go above the portal level. So like those people are not attempting 12s. Like when you're attempting a 12, you're trying to do some high level shit, right? Which is admirable. Love that shit, right? But like that doesn't happen accidentally to someone who's trying to get their weekly keys done. Like it's obvious what you're trying to do if you do that, right? I wonder what he's gonna come away with this and say.
Which mainly, so what they've built in the War Within is like this big wall, especially at 12s, where the health, the damage are all really high, which makes the players have to be even better at their classes, even better at their specs, really in order to make it over this wall, in order to really progress. But because of the infinite nature of spamming Mythic Plus, where as long as you can find a keystone, you can just keep on playing the game, you don't really have that improvement that Blizzard's trying to force upon the player base. You kind of just have people smashing face into the dungeons, and as players continue to improve, they also get a lot more exclusive. Way back.
I don't know if I'm really following.
Back in Legion, when Mythic Plus first came around,
maybe he'll
on
pull
NA,
it together
there
here.
was a pretty vibrant Discord community that was really looking to like get people together to start doing Mythic Plus Dungeon. And then over time, that community basically just fell apart because people started getting more and more exclusive. Before the 0.1% title really came along, people realized that there was, you know, a handful of the total player base that they could progress into the highest dungeons. And so it became more about getting onto people's friends lists and getting into that networking to find those elite groups to continue sort of progressing. Now, that kind of got broken up into a bunch of different tiers, not just in the 0.1%, but also in like the 1%, where people would very rarely want to like pug somebody. They very rarely want to pug somebody, only kind of play with their friends, and more people started kind of shifting to that over time. This is kind of...
What is it? I think he may be pointing out that players will naturally end up at a plus 10 and up, but just sheer force, not by playing well. Interesting, isn't it? I feel like getting to a 10, maybe this isn't true. We actually kind of talked about this on the podcast recently, but okay. Do you think that doing a 10 this season is the hardest a 10 has ever been?
No.
So they have like the increased dungeon mechanics.
Not even
right?
close.
Not even close. Stuff like does more damage. Okay, a few no's, mostly yeses. On
People
season
saying
start,
easily
yeah.
yes, they're
I've
wrong.
kind of heard I haven't really heard a lot of arguments against that. Like, it kind of seems like they've amped up the amount of mechanics. They've changed the key scaling system. I guess it's interesting because when you're doing a 10, you don't have...
10s were a lot harder when they were 20s.
When you're doing a 10, you don't have, like, sanguine and bolstering and shit. But
Back when 10s were 20s, they were really hard.
Like maybe one of the most punishing
no
things
sanguine, no bolstering,
like
you saying?
Done the one time. Not to mention that
this shit's a piece of piss,
Is it the first
dude.
season we're doing... Is this the hardest the key level has been to get the highest?
It's a fatty
loot
gear
from your
check,
vault
that's
as well?
for sure.
So, like, you have to
it
do
is
a 10
definitely
to get
gear
Mythic
checking the
Track
hell
loot.
out of you.
Has it
but
been
it's not hard to
10
do.
in previous seasons to get the best Mythic Plus loot, or could you have done like a 9, right? It was a plus, was an 8 or so? Like, I think 10 still gave you like a higher, what I'm asking is like when the beginning of the Mythic Track started on the weekly vault. Not, I know like 10s I think gave a higher eye level one, but it was still on the same track. It was 8. So like it's an 8, plus there's a 15-second death timer, plus I think this seems true is like objectively the dungeons are just kind of harder because like it just seems like
the dungeons are pretty hard, no question.
You can't use stops to stop everything, so you're
not harder than Dragonflight
Season 1.
Kicks.
If you go lower down the key levels, that's what people really struggle with. So I don't know, it kind of logically makes sense that this would be the hardest that 10s have been, and also by far the hardest the weekly farm get the best gear in the game keys have been. Right?
Yeah, the farm keys
so
are definitely harder. The farm keys are much harder.
Like players that normally maybe didn't go
but
for the
10s
portals,
are
now feel
actually
like they have
easier
to because they just need the gear in general.
Which makes sense because you've got to
First time
farm
having
10s for
Tyrant
gear
and Ford
now.
the
It's
same
not
key as
just
well.
for
Yeah, true.
portals.
Pepega phone. Doing 20s were totally optional back then. Well, they weren't optional if you wanted the portals, and like I think the portals are like something that the casual community really fucking like. They love the fucking portals. It's honestly a really cool reward. But yeah, I mean, it's like I don't know. It's a checklist thing. Like you've played WoW for a really long time, and a checklist that you have is: am I like getting the best loot out of the vault I can? Am I mythic rating? No. Well, I can still get mythic track loot if I do some 10s, and you kind of just like weekly no levered them before, but now, and you did less than 10s before, but now you have to do 10s, which have Fort and Tyran, and a 15-second death timer, and there's more mechanics in the dungeons. Like, it's kind of a perfect storm of absolutely slaughtering people, right? It's not surprising. A lot of people have an AOTC plus portals internal checklist, yeah. I want to let Jack finish up this thought. I'm going to rewind it a little bit.
A bunch of different tiers, not just in the 0.1%, but also in like the 1%, where people would very rarely want to like pug somebody. They'd very rarely want to pug somebody, only kind of play with their friends, and more people started kind of shifting to that over time. This is kind of what's happening right now in the or within Season 1, from what I've seen, is that dungeons over 12 are having not huge amounts of people looking around in groups in LFG, and you're having a lot of players really just getting like slammed at that 12 level, and it might change a little bit thanks to this challengers.
Because they can't charge out of bounds, so you get more DPS uptime. So
Paralaphic, but I think a lot of people get like really hard gated at 12 because of the jump up in difficulty and the fact that the game.
I just want to stop him right there. So I think there's been less people doing Mythic Plus in general.
It's
That
supposed
could
to
be
be
the
a hard
timer
gate
thing.
at
That
12.
could be the increased mechanics.
That's
But also,
intentional.
when you're specifically talking about people doing above 12s, do you think the community is majorly different from people who are doing above 12s now versus people who are doing like 22s through 25s last expansion before they made the change in Season 4? Because both of those scenarios require someone to make the active decision of I'm doing keys because I want to do high keys, and I'm no longer doing keys for the rewards from it. That hasn't changed at all, right? It's the same thing. So you're basically just saying the high key community is just smaller than it was before because that decision is exactly the same. Or you're saying that like before maybe it was a little easier to
like the
do your
dragon,
20s and get your portals, and then maybe you do some 21s with the
unfortunately.
boys, and no, you've done 21s now. Maybe you do 22s, but maybe like the jump at 12 is so big that like that just completely stops those people. I've always just assumed that if you're trying to do 25 pluses, you just know that from the beginning of the season, and like that's your goal, and those people kind of like are already set, you know? Like, I don't think a lot of people randomly wander into, like, what 22s, 23s, and 24s used to be after they got their portals. Or if they did, they had a goal in mind of, like, getting title. Or, like, they love Mythic Plussing, so they just want a Mythic Plus all the time. But, like, those people would probably still be doing that now because it's purely based on the gameplay they love, which is still there. And that title is still there, right? I guess maybe there's, like, I'm missing a group of people. Like, I assume there's a lot of the low-level people, which there might be a bunch of different categories within there, and then there's people who are doing 10s for vault loot, and then there's people who are doing 10s for portals, and that's their goal. They get AOTC, and they're kind of done with the content for the patch. They know their limits. That's fine. And then I see like another group of people that are planning on going above 12 because they like doing high keys. And maybe I'm missing a group in between the 10s for portals and people with high keys as an aspiration. That sounds like
I mean, the 10s
what
do
is
get
happening.
pretty boring
If
after a
there's
while
any
because
less
they're not
people
that
doing above
hard.
12 than there was that used to.
Like, there's that fundamental tension there, right? Where folks are saying, like, 10s are the hardest they've ever been. No. 10s are as hard as 8s were last season. But because it is just fortified plus tyrannical, like, that's kind of boring. There's no seasonal affix or annoying old school affixes like bolstering to kind of spice things up. The 10s are very sauceless. There's not a lot going on in a 10.
To go above a 22, because it should be the same.
Compared to a
It should
10
be
the way they
same,
used to be.
Okay, correct. I am that group at maximum. Okay, that's perfect. Can you tell me why it's big tone? So if you're that group of people, explain.
I forgot. The coagulation is here as well. I kept thinking this was Arakara. But it's City of Threads.
Like, advocate and tell me why you do what you do. Like, a person doing 10s goes for vaults and portals. A person who wants to do high keys is going to just do high keys. You're the group in between that. Tell me what your motivation is to do a key above a 10 after you have portals and all the gear you want. Like, what is the reward? Why are you doing it? I'm just trying to, like, understand. IO? But isn't that the same motivation as the high key group people? It's no different? That's why I'm trying to understand the difference. Just for fun? But I think that's also the high key people, or maybe it ends up turning into that. I think that's why those people do it, for fun and for IO. There's no different. Maybe it's like, I want to do 11s and 12s so I get higher. There's a group of people who like doing 10s quickly for loot on the reset, so they do 11s and 12s to get higher IO so they get invited quicker to 10s. I can see that.
That makes
That's a
sense.
motivation that actually makes sense to me. Okay, he responds.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I want
I would
a
do that,
challenge
actually.
to enjoy, and I do 12.
I would
or
definitely
so.
do some
like
11s.
Back then, I liked
just to make
being
it easier
able
to
to
get
play
in
at
that
20,
10, for
21,
sure.
22, but I didn't want to go nuts chasing title. I just wanted generally harder content, and it no longer feels like there's a ramp in difficulty to do so, and it's a brick wall. Okay, so that makes perfect sense what you just said. So that is.
Man, after this has
I
been
feel like there's
called,
probably a lot of people that would agree with that.
Will
okay,
Drink
that makes
has
sense. So
been
there is a
called.
group that in between high keys and. Just
all the
doing
way up
10s,
has
and
been
it's
called.
Basically just going for a
Nothing
challenge
can
that is
stop me.
challenging
I'm
for you,
all
and
the
you just
way
like doing
up.
that, but now you feel like that challenge doesn't exist.
Nothing
because once
can
you're at
stop
11,
me.
it's
I'm
just like
all
there's
the
no
way
fucking
up.
point in doing it 12 because it jumps so much. True. I mean, then you have to ask like, why Blizzard even thinks that.
Weird voice crack there as well. That was fun.
Like why?
Oh my
like
God.
why
Oh
is
my
there a
God.
massive
What,
jump at 12?
what the
I guess
hell?
it was to
What
like
the
clearly
hell?
define the high keys and the low keys, but. It's also probably ruining the chance that anyone could ever get into high keys in the first place because of the
Nothing
wall.
can stop me. I'm all the way up.
Who knows? It's okay. Let's see what Jack says.
Game doesn't really teach you how to get better. There's three main factors that you really have to balance in Dungeons over 12s. Doing enough damage, especially with the tank nerfs that were kind of put in this expansion. Tanks don't live forever. They have incredible tankiness. But, you know, when I play with VDH, there's times where if the pack doesn't die in X amount of time as we're trying to do a pull,
just run out.
that he will just melt, right?
Yeah.
Or he has to be forced to kite or something along those lines. The damage checks get really high, especially as you start ramping up in keys over 12. The healing check ramp up very quickly, as I'm sure a lot of you have noticed from our channel, especially when you're pugging in cast go through. And the third factor is the crowd control element. And so all of these things really get pushed upon you as you go into higher level dungeons. And I would argue, since the War Within has put together, or actually Dragonflight to be honest, has put together all these talent nodes, we have more abilities really than ever before that we have to take advantage of. You have things like kick, obviously, but it used to be that healers didn't actually have kick. You know, you have all of the crowd control, thunderstorms, stuns. You have a
Oh yeah,
variety
it's
of
so
different
hard to be a
formats.
shaman. Oh, you have so many useful buttons you can
There's
press.
so many
That-
buttons
oh,
to
that
press, man. It's so hard to be a
sucks.
shaman with
Oh,
all
man,
these
that
buttons,
sucks.
And
dude.
a lot of these are not
Oh.
new, but having all of
I
these
got too many
together
buttons,
is
bro.
Also having Blizzard balance around having all of these things. For example, I know this
You
is
can't.
HPS logs.
It's
but
so funny. Like the Resto Shaman situation this season shows you more than anything how much they have internally changed dungeons. Resto Shamans, as far as I know, don't have fucking anything different that they didn't have last season or the season before in Dragonflight. Like, maybe there's like a cool new talent or something, but that's not why they're meta. Like, the people that describe why they're meta, like, oh, Curse Dispel, Poison Cleansing Totem, the amount of stops, they have a stun, they have a knock, they have a really short cooldown kick. They had all of that in the past. The only thing that has changed is what the dungeons require, which has made that feel like a necessity, which has just not been the case before. And that is fascinating in my opinion, because like usually the healer meta is determined by like new cool things this healer has or their tuning level. That's not even what this is. They have a raid buff now. Bro, I don't think that is what massively pushed them over the edge.
Yeah, man, that mastery. That's why we're bringing him.
But like, I don't know, there's
I
really
love
good
getting
raid
a
buffs
shit
that
ton
are
of
in the top group
mastery
right now, right? Like, I think clearly it's the amount of buttons they have and the ability to deal with what Blizzard has posed with you as a problem. So like it's just the new Kiss Curse affixes, which doesn't really exist on high keys, but it's that stuff, and then it's they just like have too many kicks and stops, and they've just made kicks and stops so much more important. But people are running Enhance and Resto, yeah, which kind of shows you that it's not really about the raid buff, right? It's about the other shit.
Range is really what I want to.
It's also just two really good classes.
Warcraft log statistics is that you'll see.
It's also the things that Shaman bring that are super important isn't something that you don't get by bringing another one. It's kind of like why Evokers are super good in raid, right? Anytime you can find a way to bring another Evoker, you're bringing another Zephyr, Rescue, you know, you're another Time Spiral, maybe a Spatial Paradox. Like, you're just bringing more value than other people bring past the initial raid buff that they provide. Shamans are kind of like that in Mythic Plus. Like, you bring a second Shaman, yeah, you're not getting Sky Fury or whatever, but you just get infinite buttons per Shaman. That just makes the dungeon easier.
Like this priest have incredibly
and
wide
both of them
ranges.
are just really
Things
strong.
Like Totemic Shaman have widely been viewed as easier to play, so they have a little bit of a smaller range. But we never really get data to show the range with which people use their kicks, their stuns, their interrupts, their defensives. There's not these statistics on these things.
Well,
but it really only takes...
there literally are statistics if people log them, but there's just not normal to like log Mythic Plus runs, especially in lower keys. Like I don't know what percentage of keys under a 7 do you think are logged and uploaded to Warcraft logs? It's gotta be like insanely fucking low, right? Like, who does that? It's probably not 1%. It's probably a little higher than that, but it's not a lot. So that information isn't really there. I wonder if Blizzard has that information. They do have other ways of getting information than just logs, even though it seems like this expansion they've almost exclusively changed things because of public logs. But they do have like other ways of tuning and like seeing stuff like that. I bet they can see the amount of like something that wouldn't surprise me from what I've seen that they have is like maybe they can just view the amount of kicks that happen on an average +7 versus like a +13 or something. Not like how many casts are going off, like how many times are people casting interrupts. They can like query that, some shit like that, which would be very interesting if more runs were logged for sure.
You pugging a couple of times to realize that there is an incredibly massive delta between people who are using those abilities and people who are not. And since Blizzard designs the game around them regardless, you can have some...
Well, see, that's the thing, right? Blizzard designs the game around these abilities, but then you never have to use them in normal, in heroic, in Mythic 0, in Mythics 2 through 8. Like, only once you finally begin scratching at that upper echelon of content do you see why these abilities exist, why you have so many buttons.
Enormously frustrating experience.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of like Anduin. Like, Anduin was a fight that wasn't super hard for the high-level guilds, because the higher you go into a guild ranking, the more likely assignments and, like, stuns and kicks, that is something that is done at a really high level. Like, if you go down the guild skill level ladder, you'll actually still see relatively good throughput compared to the top teams, but the thing that totally stands out is their ability to be consistent with, like, kick and stop assignments. Like, that is something that is, you've done it a million times, it's ingrained in what you do. So, like, Anduin absolutely slaughtered guilds, and there were guilds that were taking 3 times the amount of pulls on Anduin than happened.
Be able to time this, actually.
Really rare,
you know, it's only fortified. There's no tyrannical buff on the boss.
It only happened on Anduin because it specifically had so many kick requirements and stop requirements. If you missed a kick in P2, your group instantly died. If you didn't kill all the ads downstairs, your group instantly died. If you didn't perfectly stop all of their stuns, like the little souls casting that little 8-second cast or whatever, if you didn't perfectly stop those every time, you instantly died. If you didn't kill the ad before the cast went off in the intermission, instantly died. There's so many little small checks, and that is so hard compared to like just pure throughput, which is what most fights require.
Pulling both?
Outside of like some basic.
And
And Mythic Plus is kind of like that, right? Like they
That's
have
a little,
made Mythic Plus more
dicey.
like the challenges that Anduin gave you than they used to be. Like, no matter what the key level is, yeah, okay, well, we need to keep making keys require more because gamers are getting better. It is true, like, as much as people would agree that I bet if they went back with, like, Legion-style dungeons where just, like, less was happening and you could just kind of pull everything, I actually think people wouldn't feel challenged enough. I think people want less of a challenge from the pure mechanical things than they do now, for sure, but I also think if you were to scale that back and remove almost all of the challenge from it, I do think that would be a sticking point, just in my opinion. We're not going to really know because they'll probably never do that. But so they are increasing with time because players are just getting better. More people do Mythic Plus. And I think they definitely overstepped this patch from what I can tell. And if you're doing it because high key players are capable of doing it and you hated how much they did stops, do you know how many less stops happen on like a +7 than like a +14? Like if you go into a Pug 8 right now, people are not fucking doing stop rotations on these ads. Like basically all of these casts are going off. And I mean, it kind of brings me back to that thing I've talked about a lot. I wonder how many mechanics Blizzard actually wants you to deal with. It's almost impossible to know. Because if you're in a really good group, you can make none of them happen most of the time. Like sometimes there's like uninterruptible shit. And if you're in a really not very invested group or like a lower group, like everything goes off. So you're not able to curate an exact experience of what you want your players to go through. Like raid bosses, except for very recently where you could use a PvP item to bug them out, raid bosses do mechanics and almost always you cannot just make the boss not do the mechanic. Like they are designing experiences that are dealt with and every guild that kills the boss does the same thing. But like in dungeons, I don't even know what Blizzard expects a dungeon pack to feel like. I imagine they don't want it to feel like they're all the same and you just stop everything from happening. They probably want every pack to slightly have different mechanics.
Pretty cursed.
Like I think it'd be fascinating to make a dungeon just once, just for science, and just make nothing able to be stopped or kicked at all. It would be kind of weird. You have a lot of buttons to stop. It'd be weird you weren't using them, and you have interrupt buttons, and it'd be weird that you weren't using it. But it would be interesting to know from that experiment, what does Blizzard actually want you to deal with? If they could curate a dungeon experience and you could actually see that you don't have to guess and say, oh, in low keys, every single one of these mechanics is happening, and in high keys, none of them are happening. Like, how much do you actually want to happen? Like, what do you think a dungeon pack should look like? And until they do that, it's just so interesting because like every pack just does infinite stuff for some people.
Well, so we're not timing it, but whatever.
And probably the people it matters the most for are the people going for 10s. It's 98% of players, and I think those are the people who struggle with it the most. But
it's fine.
I don't know. We also talked about on the podcast recently of like, could you make people like doing defensives? Could you like reward people for using defensives well, so like people get better at it? Dude, one idea we came up with that people would absolutely hate, but it would make people better, is like having certain mechanics in the dungeon if you don't use a personal for them, and it's mechanics that they're not happening every 10 seconds. They happen, let's just say there's like one boss has one cast where you need to have some kind of mitigation for, and like another boss has that, and there's like one mini boss trash pack that has it. And every time you get hit with it without using a personal, it would give you a damage down. You do X% less damage for the next 10 seconds. Now,
honestly, that's pretty good.
Like, no, this is so fucking bad. And I think people would hate it.
Actually.
But I think after like a couple runs of it, people just care about their overall damage at the end of the dungeon and their damage they do on the packs. People would actually really fucking make sure they had a mitigation personal for those. It's Final Fantasy does this. Final Fantasy, very different game in Final Fantasy, but it is a concept from that. People do really care about damage, so like, if people are just mongoing damage, you better fucking believe they'd start thinking about where they're using their personals if they had to, and that would help so much for healing, and just making people better, because the game is kind of telling you what mechanics you should have personals for, and they can design the game that way. Obviously, you would need to make it not happen enough to where certain classes can't actually get rid of everyone, but it would encourage better play, and it's a way to reward you, because we thought about it on the podcast, like other ways to get around it. It's like, oh, well, maybe you could give someone some kind of damage increase for how much damage they absorbed with their, like how much damage they reduced during the cooldown. First of all, I think that'd be really hard to do, but also it's just like vengeance all over again. So you'd have players just like pop all their personals and then just like sit in fire and that has like so many problems. But like, there's almost no issue with the damage downs if they create it well, and it would make people actively think about their defensives better than just like mongoing the dungeon.
Just like in our previous videos where we've talked about the problems with healing and Dragonflight being based off of having so many defensives that you basically have to have a defensive up for every major mechanic in order to survive, so too is the game being designed around all of the additional crowd control that continues to get added over time. Having more resources than ever to unlock all these abilities also means that Blizzard wants to challenge players and make it so that they have to use every single ability in order to make sure you're having more successful runs, or just about, or having like almost all the people taking advantage of those things. And what you really have noticed over time is that there's not a really good way for the game to teach people how to utilize these mechanics. For example, we had like Exile's Reach as new players are sort of getting into the game, but since it's not involved in
I want to stop them there a little bit too. I'm like watching this pack and I'm looking at these casts and like a couple of them went off. I think they could, okay, they did something this expansion, right? They made stops less powerful against certain things, which did a few things, mostly negative. But what it did do is it put a lot of more power in your actual interrupt spells, counterspell, kick, spear hand strike, or whatever, the actual kick spells. And I wonder if they could do a little bit more with, and this would help lower level play. Like, you know how like there's usually like these little nodes right here? And the idea is like, oh, well, if you're kicking a lot, you can use this point and like it'll give you some runic power and it'll reduce your cooldown. And if you're doing like warriors, it'll increase your damage against the target. And shamans have a super fucking broken one. It's like, bro, what is the shaman one again? It's actually so OP. Unless they changed it with the patch, maybe they did. But the shaman one is like when you kick a certain spell school, you get a DR from it. Interrupting a spell with Wind Shear decreases your damage taken from that spell school by 15% for 18 seconds, stacking up to 2 times. That is so fucking good. That is so good. But I wish they did more of this, and I wish it wasn't talents. I just wish, in general, every class in the game that had a kick, Get Mad Healer Priests, got a benefit that people actually cared about. And I think the result of that would be people in dungeons are like, maybe the worst case scenario of this is people are all trying to snipe the same kick from each other because those bonuses are...
God, where are you here? Take this.
I just feel so squishy in these keys.
Okay. It is now definitely time for a break. We've not had a proper break all night. And I know my kitties are just wondering, what the heck? Well, kitties, your waiting is over. Hey, gorgeous. I can tell Porthos is feeling better. He's back to attacking my feet. Athos giving me little kisses. Babies. Take a third baby. No going on the desk. No going on the desk, that's the rule. I know you've been good, but your sisters haven't, and you all have to follow the rules, or you'll wonder why one person gets a special exception. I know how siblings work. I know how siblings work. Get our proper break thing up. Did I get any Valor Stones for that, I wonder? I got some. Not enough to upgrade an item, but I got some. That was pretty good. In fact, I'm almost to 90. I'm almost there. Nope. Go on the desk. Hey, gorgeous. not getting on my desk, though, D'Artagnan. You're not getting on my desk. I won't let you. Look at that tail. That was almost back then. Yeah, it was a little bit more than 3.5 hours with no sweet babies. I missed my sweet babies. I missed them. I missed my sweet babies. Even though this one is getting into trouble already. D'Artagnan, you're the reason no babies allowed on the desk exists. She's the reason why babies aren't allowed on the desk. Because she gets on the desk and causes mayhem. And the other babies aren't exactly angels themselves when it comes to getting on the desk. They just see it like a big jungle gym. But my monitors and stream equipment are not a jungle gym for their enjoyment. Little Porthos. Can we get him on the stream? Porthos, will you come say hi to the stream? Porthos! Hooray! It's Porthos! I got you in a suplex. He loves being cuddly off camera. The most he'll give the stream is his butt. He'll stick his tail up at the camera and say, "See, stream? I'm Porthos." But he's a big cuddle bug now. Longtime fans of the stream know that Porthos was the last to come around to pets. But when he was having that trouble with his eye a week ago, he jumped right into my lap and stayed there for hours. That's how I know he's feeling better now. He's more rambunctious. Back to wrestling with my feet and nibbling on my fingers. I'm glad you're doing better, sir. I'm so worried about you. You're almost in the frame. You're almost. Oh, you cheeky git. It's like you know what the camera can see. And you were like, no, I'm gonna just drop down and be super cute. My boy. I'm glad he's doing better. Alright. Let's feed these babies. Let's feed these sweet little babies. Let's feed them. Well, at the moment, they're not reaching a quorum. His sisters all want food, but Porthos is like, nah. You gave them all pets and cuddles. Where's my portion? And that's fair. One does not have to actually appear on camera to be worthy of pets and cuddles, my sweet boy. My sweet little sir. You're able to close it. Doesn't look as swollen or red anymore. And I hope you're still able to see out of it okay. I hope you're not like punished Porthos, the musketeer whose eye endured. Screams, feed me, feed me. Okay, fantastic. We fed the babies. We
make pee-pee. Make pee-pee.
And we are ready to resume.
Are really powerful, but honestly, that's a really fucking good problem to have. Like, I feel like that problem in a lower key, having the problem of people interrupting too much is like so much fucking better than what is happening right now, right? So I don't know. I think that's something to be fucked around with. Like, I actually think that would help a lot in the game.
Is that there's not a really good way for the game to teach people how to utilize these.
What is it? If you hit your kick and it doesn't interrupt something, it shouldn't go on CD. I thought about that as well. It can't get its full cooldown rewarded because then you would just macro it into every spell and that would be like super degenerate. But I actually do think something like if your kick doesn't actually interrupt something, I think it going on half cooldown instead of full cooldown is just good. I think that would actually be really good.
For example, we had like the Exile's Reach as new players are sort of getting into the game, but since it's not involved in endgame content, a lot of people were just kind of...
What is it? I think that just leads to everyone setting their kick on the first cast and then you miss kicks on everything else for the next 10 seconds. That's possible. I think that is an infinitely better problem to have than the one right now where no one's using it ever in lower keys. I think the success chance on interrupt things killing you would be a lot higher in that scenario.
Skipping ahead, boosting
it
ahead.
will break PvP, make it not work in PvP.
And then just
make it not work in PvP.
They have the ability to do that.
The regular game.
PvE and PvP are totally fucking different. Why wouldn't you be able to do that?
I'd also argue since Delves have existed, they've sort of made a progression path more focused towards casual players, and the Mythic Plus and like raid environments are really focused towards what I would call competitive players. I think in general, a lot of casual players are going to play the game a lot. They might even play as much as competitive Mythic Plus or competitive raid players might. Their emphasis is going to be not so much on let me push out as much damage, as much healing, as much whatever. They still want to improve their gear, but there's a different mindset that they have going on. And as a result, since you kind of diverge those player bases a little bit more when it comes to gear progression, in my opinion, it seems like the changes they've been making to Mythic Plus has been that they feel more comfortable adding on more difficulty into these dungeons, just like how the raid devs are consistently making raids more challenging. And I think Nerevar Palace is a really good example of how the raids have gotten steadily more difficult over time. So while we're well into the season right...
That's true, and that kind of happens in games, but the Nerevar Palace thing is, I think 2 tiers in a row, they've just really fucked up the feeling of like a wall. Like the Laridar and Naimu and Smolderon being too easy for their spot in the raid, and then Tindril just... The wrong guilds were at Tindril at the wrong time because the bosses before were not difficult enough linearly. And the exact same thing happened this tier. Like, Brood Twister was too hard.
All right, let's try and get into a 10.
Sure, but
let's try and get kissed on the forehead
was that
with
Rashinan and Sikran were so easy that guilds that should not be on Brood
Let's
Twister
really
were on Brood Twister before they were supposed to, and that made it significantly harder. And that's something that's weird. That doesn't normally happen. That's not a common error. They don't do that a lot. But they've done it twice in a row.
You know, be decent, be kind.
Now, I think what we're really going to be looking for is how the difficulty of dungeons continues to sort of branch out. And one of the largest levels of difficulty is just finding a group to begin with that can press their buttons well. And I think the more that you're having the continued sort of bloat with lots of cooldowns, lots of crowd control, lots of defensives, the wider of a range of players that you're really going to be experiencing. And it's also going to start, I believe, turning people off to the game when they start feeling like their progression gets stopped. Now, you might have an entire wide range of
like the wall at 12 definitely matters. Like if you're someone who feels like you can go above an 11, and then the wall at 12 makes you not feel that, and you're kind of where you are, you've already gotten AOTC, maybe you're not in a Mythic guild.
I wouldn't enjoy it.
You are going to just stop playing the game. Like the gear progression matters, and some people do play just for that. Some people do play just for collecting and stuff like that. But if you are you want all of that to happen simultaneously. That's when WoW is at its best, right? You don't want to be just playing the game to like do your weekly vaults and then just maybe you get a little stronger. You want to apply it to something, which is why people Mythic Raid or why people do higher keys. You want to apply that power you're getting to something and make it worth getting, right? That's best case scenario. And like the 12, I am learning, especially in this video from talking to that guy earlier and some of you earlier, that you just feel like there's nothing to do in the game, you know?
Player base, and then you have a fraction of people who are doing
unable
15s
to do it
and up right now.
It's like that Rashinan Brood Twister wall exists in Mythic Plus. It's just a 12.
a little bit larger of a chunk here that's doing 12s, and then you kind of have like the rest of the player base. But what you forget is
I wish they would give something more for getting title. Yeah, they should give you like a fucking $1,000 stimulus check. If you get the Mythic Plus title, they should send you $1,000 American dollars.
Increasing an item level every single week, probably for the next month and a half, until people start getting close to BIS. And as a result, as people get closer to BIS, they're naturally going to progress further in towards 12s. But because the wall is going to be so high with doing 12s, the execution checks are going to be so high, it's going to be a real bear, I think, for a lot of players who want to have steady progression and to be able to continuously overcome things, which is a positive for having a slower gearing process. It's also going to be a negative if the wall itself is so large and the game doesn't do enough to really prepare you for what you're going to experience. Strong players, they're going to continue.
$1,000 Walmart gift card, because then no one will cash it. Yeah, it's fucking win-win for everybody. Blizzard's giving out $1,000, and because fuck Walmart, no one will even spend it. Let's fucking go. Save it for a rainy day.
Towards their friends list, look towards
when you need some like one-ply toilet paper or something.
Less willing to take on unknown people, and for people trying to rise through the groups, well, there's just going to be less groups available doing those 12s, 13s, and onwards, in my opinion, than we've seen.
Max, why don't you make videos talking like this guy? I'm doing it right now. I'm doing that this instant. You mean like, why don't I do some off-stream, speak right into the camera type shit? I could. I don't know. It's just I don't like the flow as much as doing it on stream and it being less formal. Those videos would probably fucking pop off, though, if I actually did do that.
Obviously. That's probably my biggest concern, is that when they rise up with that difficulty, players are sort of adapting in a variety of different, and part of that is making sure you have
Jack's a pro. Yeah, he's like a really good caster. I wouldn't be a good caster.
Becoming more exclusive, and that's really where you've seen a lot of the issue with the invite protests that we had a couple weeks ago, was that people didn't feel like they were getting invited. Now, part of that is definitely related to spec balance and how much damage specs do, where some specs are just absolutely crushing others. Naturally makes doing high keys significantly easier if you just kill off everything fast enough. You need less kicks, less defensives, all of that. But it also is going to be relating it, how willing are people to try new players out or try players out when, hey, this one person has significantly higher eye level, okay, we're just going to be able to bring them in, we know what we're doing, or people are just not going to be listing at all and then waiting for friends, waiting for network to be able to come on.
Max would be the Tony Romo of casters, calling out plays before they happen on a boss. That is not a WoW thing. I don't think I'd be good at casting most things, but let's just say there's some like alternate reality, or let's just say I like no longer am doing the Race to World first. I like fucking retire from that or something. I would be a fucking insane Race to World first caster. Like I'm pretty sure I would be like the very best at that. Not like someone calling out sponsors and shit. I don't know how to do that, but being like analytical about what's happening, I'm pretty sure I would be like the best person at that, just from my experience.
So as I've been,
but like I don't know, there's like there's a lot of skill to casting that I don't have, that I would have to figure out, but the actual like content of it would be really easy.
The issue is really that they've made these affixes going into the new expansion to be more punishing and to force more precise gameplay upon people before they're going to be able to progress, but the game itself doesn't do much to teach you how to use these resources effectively. The difference between using a damage reduction cooldown before a hit, after a hit, in preparation.
Oh yeah, dude, do you know that? Do you guys know that feeling? Everyone does this, but like the feeling of taking a ton of damage and then panic using a personal and then taking literally 0 damage during the duration of your personal being up. Oh man. That fucking sucks. I imagine if you're a healer and you see that, you actually get so tilted.
Very, very different.
I've done that today.
As a healer.
I mean,
that's happened to me on this stream.
Stops, interrupts required, and teaching people about how direct interrupts really are working. Well, you need to use add-ons for these things. You need to use third-party resources.
And I'm mad. And I'm mad. Look at that. And we're talking about add-ons now.
Which of the mobs in 8 different dungeons are priorities?
Remove them from my game.
Downsides of what they do. And it's incredibly brutal. It's a huge skill check for people going into it. And the game doesn't really teach you those things. So what should they be doing instead? Well, I really think, especially when it comes to interrupts, that they should be removing that direct interrupt where you need to actually use a wind shear, use a kick in order to stop a volley cast.
Yeah, it does seem like a failed experiment.
And then you should be able to use those AoE crowd control abilities.
But I do like the idea of interrupts being important and players being incentivized to use them, and I think they already have the idea. It's just not in follow-up talents. It's just build it into the game, man. Make everyone feel like they want to get a kick when it happens. I think the worst case scenario is that everyone's just spamming kick because they just need it so bad, and maybe it shouldn't be that powerful, but I think there's a line in between those two things where people are just kind of naturally interrupting more, and it would help the entire game.
I think the crowd control has gotten really out of hand. The requirements have gotten really out of hand in dungeons, and the punishment is razor high when you're in these pub groups. You can't communicate all of these things unless you are in.
What is it? Yeah, but then in pub groups, you'll have everyone send kick on the first cast they see, and then what? Yeah, that's worst case scenario, but I don't know if you see that happen. Just like maybe you'll get used to the second and third cast of things not having kicks up, and then that's when you actually start stunning. Like right now, people don't really know when we're kicking or stopping, but that would actually kind of give you a blueprint to that. You just assume everyone's slamming their kicks instantly in that worst case scenario, so you know that if you do have any stops, that they're actually really important on the next cast.
A lot of players don't always want to get in voice, don't always want to communicate every single little thing that they're doing. They don't.
Sefus was in the game and people didn't all start fighting. Oh, such a good fucking point, by the way. Sefus was really good for almost every class in the game. When it was initially out, it was dog shit, but when they buffed Sefus, it was like, I think it might have been the best dungeon legendary for almost every class in the game, which is probably the most extreme version of what we're talking about, where you kick and get a massive benefit from it. And the opposite worst case scenario thing
It's a
didn't
Legion
happen.
legendary.
You didn't have everyone fucking fiending for every kick. At least I don't remember that. But also the game's become more high level since Legion, like a lot. Like people were very, very